So Commonwealth Canada, this is a group that emerged out of UBI Works. Many of you are here from a basic income background. We'll talk a bit about that later. We feel there's a need for two different conversations. One is, of course, about the need for guaranteed basic income to reduce and end poverty, but the other is more about how do we deal with the overall drivers of poverty. And that's what Commonwealth Canada is about, talking about where the money comes from, some of the more controversial topics. So we are for a national investment fund and a land value tax, both of which can pay Canadians monthly dividends and eliminate income taxes for at least 2/3 of Canadians. And we're going to talk to you why we're for this, and then we're going to go into some of the reasoning for it. These are some policies that that Commonwealth under this brand will be promoting, separate again from the basic income movement. This does lead to something like a basic income, but actually they can work together, and I'll talk a bit more about that soon. So just one moment. So I'm just going to turn off the screen share, and because I have just a bit of a pre-recorded talk. So we're here to solve two problems that are preventing us from having society where progress benefits everyone, and these problems are deeply interlinked. The first one is automation is reducing the income of working people. I mean, how do we know? We see two phenomena. Working people are getting less and less of a share of our economic output across the developed world, and stagnation in growth of real wages has been happening for decades. Literally, labor is losing in share. Middle-class jobs are being automated away and not being replaced. No experts are predicting new middle-class jobs, while all the gains are being concentrated at the top 1% and 10% of income earners. The second trend is that cost of living keeps going up and up. Well, what's causing this? Primarily, one factor is being felt is housing costs. Rent and mortgage, which are most people's number one expense, are eating up a greater share of people's wages. We all know this, and the cost of the average house has skyrocketed in comparison to incomes. These two trends mean that working people are working harder and longer for less than their parents and grandparents had, creating a lot of hopelessness and despair. So a key to understand here is that these two trends, to declining incomes and exploding cost of living, are interlinked. And what's overall driving both of these trends is that our economy is rewarding people who already own things more than people who are doing the work to keep the economy going. In other words, we live in an owner's economy. In general, it's more profitable to simply own things than to actually make things. And that's been the case for decades. It's been the case in Canada, around the world, that greater returns have gone to asset owners than to workers. And the crazy thing is that the cycle reinforces itself, because the more unequal things get, the top 10% then go buy up more property, which then bidding behavior can make life more expensive for everyone else as well. In other words, more automation means more inequality of property, leading to higher cost of living. And fundamentally, inequality of income is at its root inequality of property. So what do? I showed two interlinked problems that we also have two interlinked solutions. Well, first, if income is being made primarily by owning things, shouldn't part of the solution include some ownership income for everyone? Like literally, in an automated economy, income flows less from work and more from property. So if we want to create a property owning democracy, we call it commonwealth, so that everyone has some ownership, some wealth that can generate an income. Second, we need to look at how the economic relationships, which relationships are driving up this cost of living. And the largest cost in everyone's life is land. Land as a component of the rent people pay, as a component of the mortgage people pay, and as a component of the prices baked into everything we buy comes the cost of land. This is by far the largest resource we need to make sure is protected from incentives that are driving up its price. And one way to do that, which has been known for hundreds of years, but I think will become more contemporary as things get worse and worse, is to make sure that we all benefit as equally as possible from rising land values, so that no one's gain is another's loss, so that rewards are given to those who use land most productively instead of those who just buy and hold. So what do these solutions actually look like? A national investment fund that holds stocks, bonds, and property, as well as a land value tax. The proceeds from both could, over time, pay Canadians monthly cash dividends of at least $10,000 a year, while eliminating income taxes on at least the first 70,000 of income, saving everyone money and freeing 70% of households from paying any income taxes. We believe these policies will create a world where work is rewarded more than ownership, where the housing market is made permanently affordable, environmental sustainability is baked into our market incentives. We've reduced poverty and inequality and created a society where progress benefits everyone directly. In other words, the best way to improve capitalism is to make sure everyone is a shareholder. So that's what we're for. These are the claims we're making. Now let's go quickly into the evidence. I'll talk for another, hopefully 15 minutes max. That's about 3 times longer than I just spoke. But I wanted to give you the key idea up front, because I hate those talks that have long and drawn out introductions. But now let's look at the evidence, and then we'll go into Q&A for as long as people want to stick around, because it's a very interesting topic. So I'm going to go and share my screen and go through a quick slide deck. So I mentioned that automation is lowering wages. 50 to 70% of the changes in wage structure is accounted for by automation of what was primarily blue-collar middle-class jobs. But we're now seeing that automation is moving into all realms, both high cognitive routine work, low cognitive difficulty routine work. It is going everywhere. There are now robots that cost less than minimum wage workers. This is predicted to have a huge impact on jobs, affecting half of all jobs. Now, we've all heard a lot of these scares in the past, but what I'm trying to put out is that the key thing to get is that it's resulted in lower wages, polarization of the labor market, with middle-class jobs not coming back. We see it in the fact that the share of economic output that's going to working people across the developed world has been in decline for many decades. This is not just in the last 10 years or this year. This has been happening since modern computing and manufacturing practices have been coming in, and a lot of research has shown that automation is the primary driver, more so than globalization and the demise of unions. Although I would argue that both of those two are in part because of automation, loss of bargaining power overall. So wages are being capped by automation, by technological development, while at the same time, cost of living is increasing and just wages are not catching up. Over 40% of Canadians are spending a third or more of their income on rent. Same could be said for mortgage payments. We see across the developed world, the actual cost of the average price of a home to median incomes has been increasing. It's been increasing in Canada, perhaps the most starkly, but it's happening everywhere. And as we know, housing is the number one cost in people's lives. It's getting so bad that working people now also have to use food banks. And this has been a prediction of economists for decades, that as automation gets to a point, eventually real wages just have to go down for the economy to keep working properly. And with growth stalled and cost of living increasing, we just see things getting harder and harder for people who are working and on low incomes. I mentioned earlier is that a result of those two things is creating an ownership economy, where those who are benefiting the most, this is from the US, primarily the top 10%, are just buying up more and more of available assets, available property, financial and non-financial assets, where the bottom 80% basically owns very little. And fundamentally, inequality of income is a result of inequality of property. And in Canada, it's a little bit better, but not much. The bottom 40% basically have very little ownership on anything. The bottom 80% collectively have only 33% of the net worth of Canada. And this is what a ownership economy looks like. Just, of course, homes are just one particular asset, but it's the one we're most familiar with. But when homes are making more than jobs in 1 year, finally we start to notice. But this has been happening for decades, perhaps for hundreds of years. I mean, this is the land and housing game that I think if we want to have fundamental change, we need to take a look at and rework to have a prosperous society, a prosperous future. So we're in this world where ownership makes more than working. income being made increasingly without work, and artificial intelligence coming down the pipe. Well, what do we do? Well, I think it's time to consider some kind of common wealth that can exist alongside public and private wealth. In a market economy, that could work just fine. And this means some ownership income for everyone, and that wealth can come from value that's created by nature and the community, not by individuals or businesses. And this, it turns out, is actually a view that many free market economists have recognized, that there is a component of income, of profit, that is fundamentally unearned, that comes from ownership primarily of natural resources, that this profit could belong to everyone fairly and morally, and would be enough money to actually reduce or end poverty and have everyone have equality of opportunity. So I'd argue that this is not socialism, and it's also not capitalism. It's a free market system that values nature and tries to create the conditions where everyone has a share of our growing progress. Like, where would we start? I mean, Thomas Paine was an American revolutionary who famously said that there's two kinds of property. And the property from the natural world, earth, air, water, should be distributed equally. We all have a birthright to it, versus the property created by people, by innovation, by market forces. Both should belong more to individuals. And that's what can be achieved with these policies of reducing taxes for those with the least wealth, and paying dividends from the value that the community creates together, that nature contributes. So back to these specific policies, we're talking about something like an investment fund for everyone. This is not a shocking idea. There are over 60 funds around the world. One of the reasons why Texas has no income tax is because they have an investment fund that was financed primarily through public land that pays for their school system, so they don't have to have income taxes. Norway has a huge fund of over $1 trillion that pays for certain parts of the government, so they don't have to have higher income taxes. But I would argue that these haven't really worked to reduce poverty, to create inequality equality of opportunity. What has worked was in Alaska, where their sovereign wealth fund pays everyone dividends directly, in part. And we see that Alaska is the most equal state in the US, even though it's a Republican state, and no one can touch that. So, I think it would be great for Canada to build an investment fund like that. And there's really nothing controversial about it. We already have pension funds. It's the same thing. It's something that benefits everyone. So whereas other funds benefit people through less taxes, why not benefit people through dividends? Now, of course, where would the money come from? Well, this is where, if we can build a political will for it, a number of places. The best source would be eco-taxes, taxes that affect, that are damaging the environment. Things like the carbon tax, but continuing beyond that. Use fees on public property, following like the example in Texas, where public lands, if the government is leasing out lands or leasing out buildings, why would the government be selling buildings when it could be leased out instead, and that money could go into a fund that benefits everyone directly? That makes no sense at all. Public-private partnerships. It's been argued that in our system, we're socializing the risk of early stage research, but we're privatizing the profits of applying that research. Many economists have called for governments to have partnerships with private sector, where research funded by publicly funded through academia should reflect value that everyone has and gets to keep. Inheritance taxes, there's a long debate on that. What if 50% of one's estate, a large estates upon death, goes to a national fund that benefits all Canadians? All of these could benefit everyone and create a better future. Another category is, again, this is more the controversial ideas, but if we really see the worst case scenarios of what automation could produce, a rapid displacement of jobs, rapid loss of social cohesion. These are some ideas that I've seen. Levies on monopolies, oligopolies, anti-competitive behavior. We all know that artificial intelligence could create more super monopolies. Well, at some point, monopoly profits are not earned. So levies on monopolies, that their shares could go into such a fund. Sam Altman, who's the president of OpenAI. OpenAI is leading the world right now in artificial intelligence with the ChatGPT products. that over in only a few months has got 100 million users. We use it at all levels also in my business. He argues that large companies should pay a shares tax. Every year, any billion-dollar plus company should put 2.5% of its shares into a fund that pays everyone dividends. And then there's an idea from Nobel Prize winning economist James Mead, the late James Mead, who predicted, frankly, all of this happening, how automation would lead to huge concentration of property. Well, he says the government could just print money and buy assets and put it in a fund. Now that may have sounded crazy 5 years ago, right? But didn't we just do that? $600 billion during COVID. And in some ways, it would be far more financially sustainable to buy assets that grow in value and produce income for people, because that would far outpace any of the costs of that debt and the interest payments on that debt, which frankly go from one pocket of Canada to the other pocket of Canada anyway. So that's something that we need to be aware of one day if things get really bad. I think it is actually, these ideas could be doable. But long before that, as I showed in the previous slide, there are more realistic approaches that have precedence around the world. The next idea, we call it a land value tax, tax shift and dividend. A tax shift in that instead of paying income taxes for most, we could contribute to the government through the payment of a tax for the amount of land that we use. A fractional land if you're in an apartment, the total amount of land you're on if you're in a house. This would actually, in Canada, we ran the numbers at Commonwealth. We have a report you could see that shows that a full land value tax meant to capture the unearned growth and the unearned rental value of land year over year could actually raise enough money to eliminate taxes on the first $70,000 of everyone's income and pay $7,000 a year in dividends to every adult. That would actually free up 70% of Canadians from paying any income tax at all, as well as being a small decrease in taxes for everyone else. Now, why would we consider this? There are many, many reasons for a land value tax, and we have many experts on this call, but there's two in particular that I want to highlight. One is that we treat homes as a wealth creation vehicle, as opposed to a place to live. And as a wealth creation vehicle, since we all want more of it, it just drives up the costs. Like any scarce resource we're fighting over, it increases its price. And the second value, which is more moral, is that the value of land is community created. No individual can create the value of land. Its value comes up, gains from technology end up in land values, public investments, the health of the community. Land value is the most considered unearned income from the get-go, and thus a good source to be considered commonwealth. Now, very importantly, is we're talking about the value of the land and not of the property. So back on the speculation incentive, we don't hear this in the media. Everyone talks about supply. But there are many places around the world where the population is going down and housing prices are still going up. There's been research showing that when you add even a skyscraper in an area, the rents only go down by like 0.5% in the surrounding areas in the years following. I think we could even double supply and it wouldn't make a difference, because fundamentally the speculative incentives, which I'm highlighting on this slide, would not go away. Because there are really two reasons people buy homes. One is because we need a place to live or rent, and also people who buy it to offer it to others to rent, which is a useful service. But the second reason is the desire to create wealth due to asset appreciation. And this reason drives bidding behavior, which increases the price of housing, combined with very easy and unregulated credit. It just keeps going up and up. And I don't think there's any solution to permanent affordable housing that does not include reforming this fundamental incentive of making homes no longer about investments. You want to invest in the stock market, but land itself should not be something that people use to create wealth. And we can see how crazy it's gotten, that this incentive has driven investors to own nearly a third of homes in major Canadian markets. We've seen since the late 90s housing prices quadrupling, 5 times bigger, even in smaller towns, not necessarily Toronto and Vancouver. We haven't seen the population of Canada increase by 5. So obviously it's not just a supply issue. There's something else going on here. And I think the answer is to reduce the speculative incentive of land. And that's what a land value tax would do very well. while actually rewarding the construction of new properties that would bring prices down even faster. So if you extend this idea of land to include all natural resources, the ownership income simply from possessing these resources, not from the value that one earns legitimately through the labor and investment returns from extracting resources, we see that there's a lot of income across the natural sector, what is traditionally considered commonwealth, air, energy, minerals, forestry, that overall combine to nearly $420 billion a year that could be raised without necessarily reducing the productivity or the market incentives necessarily in those markets. So what can we do with that $420 billion a year? Well, on one hand, there's the view of the Henry George movement, which says end all taxes, just have one tax. If we did that, there would still be room. We could eliminate all income taxes, for example, and there could still be enough money to pay $5,000 a year in dividends. On the other end is the Thomas Paine view, which is just dividend all of it. That could give $16,000 a year to all adults. Now, this is a hypothetical. I mentioned earlier different numbers. This is just showing what could be done with $420 billion a year, which could be an end state we could reach if we adopt these types of tax policies. In reality, a combination of a land value tax and eco-taxes that put money into a fund over time could get to numbers that approach these. So just as we conclude, I find it very interesting that this is not a unique idea. So the OpenAI, the president, Sam Altman, mentions as well that to embrace this technological future, we need to find a way to tax assets, because assets will make the majority of wealth, not workers. And he identifies companies and land. So we can do that through, he proposes a fund, also a land value tax. Mariana Mazzucato also recognizes that there is co-created wealth that should be shared with a larger community from natural resources, from public investments, and that could go out to pay a citizen's dividend. Karis Roberts also talking about citizens can own a part of a large fund that benefits everyone directly. And Professor Guy Standing, who is part of the foremost champion of the basic income movement, has been for 30 years, proposes a commons permanent fund, which would be funded primarily from levies from commercial intrusions into the environment, into the commons, land value tax, eco-taxes, digital information levies on large tech companies, and many others. So to conclude, what is the difference between commonwealth and basic income? Well, Guy Standing himself mentions that he sees that, of course, we need to have a program that will reduce poverty immediately, but he sees that a fundamental justification for basic income or for citizen dividends is as a shared return on the natural resources that belong to everybody. And thus we could see the difference between these two programs, which work together, frankly, as a basic income guarantee, being a way to end or reduce poverty right now, to modernize the social system. We definitely need that. We'll continue that advocacy. And commonwealth is something we need next, which addresses the financial causes of poverty, wealth inequality, and rising cost of living. Its intent is to give everyone a share of the economy, more so than the ending poverty. And these two can work together. So here we see that dividends from shared wealth could underlie a social assistance system, including underlying a guaranteed basic income, unemployment, disability. In fact, all those programs would become less expensive if people already had some sort of commonwealth dividends from shared wealth. So looking ahead, what do we want to do as an organization? Well, we want to build a network to amplify these ideas, writing, speaking, campaigning, supporting those who want to campaign, produce a lot of engaging content, because there's a lot of, not a lot is written about economic rents and this type of ownership thinking. We feel that as artificial intelligence moves faster and faster, affecting the job market, I want the world to think about what is everyone's rightful share, as well as how do we give people time to transition through a guaranteed basic income. I think these arguments could create the need to finally address our relationship to land and our relationship to natural resources, which I think is at the heart of a lot of the problems in our modern system. Want to support research within Canada primarily on economic rents and these topics, and present. So this talk, some of you are seeing it the second time. I want to keep making it better and better. and encourage others with talks, produce a speaker bureau of sorts, and try and bring the message far and wide. So we're about to go into the Q&A, and I would encourage everyone to please fill out the survey. Chelsea will put it in the chat. You'll get an email with it afterwards. This will help us to understand what you thought about this talk, about these ideas, and if you want to get involved. I recommend you fill out the survey now while we're doing Q&A. And that said, you can add questions on Slido if you visit slido.com and enter this code. And that is the talk component. Now we're going to go into Q&A. And the call will end officially in half an hour. But anyone who wants to stay and learn more, because we have a number of domain experts on the call, you're welcome to. Last time, I think 20 people stayed a full 90 minutes longer than the original talk, which is very exciting to see that people are that passionate about it. So yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, Chelsea, you want to bring up the slides?
Yeah, so the most asked question was, could a land value tax be passed on from landlords to tenants?
Yeah, so we have some domain experts in the room. I know, Ed, you're here, and
yeah, I'm sure Frank has the same answer that I do, is that the economic theory says no. Basically, what you're doing is you're eliminating the potential income stream to the property owner, to the land owner. And so there's nothing to be capitalized by the market into a selling price for land if rent is fully collected. So there's no way for the owner of the land to pass on costs to the tenants, because more and more land is going to be brought into use. Every owner of land is going to have a really strong financial incentive to bring whatever land they hold into its highest best use, or sell it to someone who will.
Another way of adding to that, totally correct, Ed, is that people sort of think of, well, what about the building I live in? What if the landlord of my building decides to, since the landlord has to pay a higher land value tax, that landlord is going to decide to jack everybody's rent by 5 or 10%. And the way this would work is, since we do live in a free market, the tenants who live in that building will move to another building where the landlord is not trying to capitalize, to hoodwink the tenants into paying this extra value. So the market system will take care of rogue landlords who will try to, they will ultimately and always be unsuccessful in passing land value taxes on to the tenants.
It's also worth adding that any owner of a property that already has, let's say, for example, a high-rise apartment building that's well maintained, under land value taxation is going to have a significant reduction in their annual property tax bill. And so they will, in fact, have a increased profit margin, even though the tax on their land values might actually go up. Their total tax bill is likely to go down.
Yeah, and also don't forget, like Floyd said, income taxes will be reduced or totally disappear for the what do you call it? The marginal tax bracket will rise for the lower income people. So you will have more money in your pocket to deal with to pay for rents and ownership.
Fantastic. The next one is along a similar vein. How would LVT impact housing? I think we started this, but it's similar, a little different.
I'll just jump right in there. First of all, if we have LVT, then the upfront cost of land will theoretically drop to zero. So when you want to buy a house, let's say, you go to the bank and you will, right now, you have to get a mortgage for the entire, for the property, the land plus the buildings. After LVT is applied, you will only need a mortgage for the building component of the property. You won't need a mortgage for the land. So effectively, your mortgage will be cut in half in average, because from now on, you will be paying a monthly land value tax to government, and you won't be financing a massive mortgage to banks. So your you will be paying money, but it'll go to government in lieu of other income taxes, instead of still paying income taxes to government plus paying interest to the bank.
Fantastic. The next two questions I'm going to put together because I think they're very similar. So the first is, have there been previous attempts to push for a land value tax at any level of government in North America? And the second, what are some real world examples, or are there real world examples of LVT success?
I did post in the chat what you can Google. It's LVT around the world. And then also the province of Alberta ran exclusively on a land value tax for about 10 years in the 20s, I believe it was. And in the US right now, the most successful jurisdiction is in Pittsburgh. And there are examples all over the world. Even in Ontario, we pay for a part of the education budget off of the property taxes, which is recognizing that property taxes are a good place to pay for something like education. And in fact, what we believe is that someone else had a question about municipalities. Municipalities will become much more important because right now municipalities are children of the province and they always have to beg for money. Whereas if we had LVT, the municipality would collect the money and pass it to the provincial and then to the federal government. It would completely invert the notion of wealth flow between levels of government. It's fascinating.
We actually, since last call, we did some research on this, and we found that actually most of the jurisdictions in Canada were funded by land value tax in the 20th century. But the intent wasn't to end speculation, to improve, housing affordability. The intent was just to collect revenue. And I think from the point of view of how do you collect more revenue, they switched it onto property, the same way that we have a progressive income tax system for the same reasons. But I guess the point that I think might resonate in the coming years, as housing is too expensive, is that if the intent is to reduce the cost of housing, then that justifies a land value tax and replacement of income taxes going in the other direction, because we know why we're doing it this time. It's not just to raise revenue; it's to actually fix the housing market.
It's worth adding to what Frank just said about the United States. The state or Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in about 1912 passed a constitutional amendment to its state constitution that gave local option to a number of cities in the state to go to a land value tax through a two-rate tax approach. So the city of Pittsburgh, the city of Scranton initially, and maybe one or two other larger cities took advantage of this and began to do a tax shift away from building values and increased the tax rate on land values. And subsequently, over the decades, more and more communities saw this as beneficial. They appealed to have themselves added. And so new legislation has been passed periodically to expand that local option. So now in Pennsylvania, there are about 25 total communities that use a two-rate property tax approach. And that includes the state capital of Harrisburg, which taxes assessed land values 6 times higher than the tax on its property improvement values. And the one former mayor of Harrisburg said it was an instrumental change in its public policies that enabled Harrisburg to go from what in the 1970s it was evaluated as a very poorly run, bad city in which to live to more recently one of the best locations to move to in the United States. So it's definitely had its beneficial impact. Unfortunately, Philadelphia does not have a two-rate property tax, despite many efforts to get the city council in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia to adopt the measure, and mayors who have supported it but not been successful in getting the well-endowed land-owning interests to go along with the change. But we're still working on Philadelphia.
Fantastic. Floyd, I think this next one is probably a little more use specific. Someone suggested a name change for Commonwealth. So I was wondering if you could explain maybe why you chose Commonwealth and if you would be open to changing the name.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's actually such a great group to talk about this with. Yeah, I mean, we're kind of just, I think I get the sense that there's kind of two reasons people are attracted to this. There's people who are interested in land value tax, and people are interested in overall poverty reduction and dividends, and see, you know, and the heart that has brought me to this is the notion that a lot of the problems we have is because there's a category of wealth that is not held in common. So commonwealth is literally wealth held in common. And if you look at automation and the impacts it's having, and many of the leading thinkers are talking about building a wealth fund so that we can share in the gains of automation. And that language, that narrative, as well as recognizing, I mean, the heart of Georgism, Henry George's ideas, is that the value of land should be commonwealth. So I kind of wanted to start with what is the actual consciousness shift that is required here, as opposed to go beat around the bush and just talk about the specific policies. Yeah, many people, maybe any LVT fans here maybe don't like that we're talking about building wealth funds and vice versa.
I actually love the idea of what it's called, Commonwealth. The technical name for what economists would call it is economic rent. So if you want to know what really Commonwealth is, it's economic rent, which means it's revenue that has no cost of production. It's very fundamental. There are two types of revenue in society. One is that's earned income, and the other is unearned income. And there's other names for economic rent or Commonwealth, and that is patents, the price of patent, the price of subsidy of supply management. There's also royalties or super profit taxes, etc. But Commonwealth sends a wonderful message, and I really support that name. It's a meme it's also a meme that goes a long way back throughout the English language because of the English Commonwealth, which of course was the British Empire, which was based on colonialism, but never mind.
And Robert, I'll come to you in a second. The last version of this talk, I tried to explain rents, and then this version I took it out because it's so freaking hard. Maybe we'll bring it back for the third version. Robert?
Yeah, the reason I wanted to ask that question is because the name, to put it bluntly, sucks. It doesn't give me any idea of what you are about. It leads me to believe we're talking about the Old English system, which is where most of the people who hear the word Commonwealth will go, as Mr. Dujon just pointed out. But it does not lead me to believe that this is about sharing the wealth. It's, by definition, an Old English term that's being reaffirmed by an idea that you're now trying to push through that door, and the door is literally constraining you to make your argument. And if you change the name to something else, and I'm sure I could come up with 20 or 30 different names that would probably do just that, give me half an hour, and it would stop you from having to go through such a narrow corridor to explain things to people. And this will be the second time I have mentioned this with intent. Now, I'll give you a really stupid example. I've run total chimney care my whole life. I still have people coming up to ask me what I do. Does that not tell you how stupid people can be? Commonwealth does not define what you're trying to get across. You need a name that would suggest to everybody as soon as they hear it, even if they're not that smart, that this is about sharing the wealth built into your country that has not as yet been done because of an old system that does not work. And that's the only reason I bring this up, because even though my company name explains exactly what I do, there's still people out there who won't get it. And Commonwealth just leads most people back to an Old English system of imperialism. So it's missing the point you're trying to make. And I really do think your idea is 100%, but your name is handicapping your whole organization.
Well, we're open. I appreciate send us some ideas. And yeah, there's a trade-off no matter what you do. The worst name is Georgism. Doesn't mean anything.
There. Okay, so the next
Actually,
question.
more importantly, is what everyday people think, not even what I think or what you think. So we'll have to do some sort of testing. Yeah.
Terrific. So the next question is, could smaller groups build funds from various sources to pay out dividends, or does something like Commonwealth have to wait on the federal government only?
Yeah, I'm sure all of us have opinions here, right? So this is idea stage work. I mean, as Frank said, municipalities could do their own land value tax shift. A province with the municipality could do a land value tax shift that includes dividends. And I mean, I live in a rural area outside of Toronto, and I get small local newspapers talking about water companies depleting aquifers. I mean, any municipality could start to create its own mini funds out of the unearned income from simply owning and possessing local natural resources. Cities have buildings that could where the proceeds of which could go to these funds.
And just imagine the synergy that would be created if the city had its own public bank.
Absolutely. I mean, in Quebec, I believe they have additional taxes on banks, because I would argue that currency and credit is the shared commonwealth of a society, and those extra taxes could be argued to go into a fund to benefit people, not only to pay for the costs of government. So yeah, I do think this could start small as well.
An example that Alberta, everybody knows, in Alberta there are no sales taxes, and that's because Alberta collects a small amount of royalties from oil. And then if you take this further, you would end up with Norway, that has $1 trillion heritage fund that they've collected from their oil. Also, Alaska collects more. Many countries in South America collect they collect all the economic rent of oil, which is their commonwealth. Sorry, Robert, I'll still use that term for now. So yes, even parking, when you park your car, you are monopolizing a patch of soil, of land in your town where your car is parked. So that you are paying parking fees, and that is like a land value tax for the privilege of monopolizing a parking spot. You are paying to the rest of the community, compensating them for you hogging this parking spot. It's a good way of understanding economic rent or commonwealth.
So this question, I think, fits well into this line of questions. Given how much property is under municipal jurisdiction, would this shift power to municipalities? I think we kind of covered this a little bit, but any follow-up on that?
Well, I'd say absolutely yes, but you'd need to be working with the federal and provincial governments to reduce income taxes for all the money that municipalities would generate from land value taxes should offset the provincial and federal sales tax and income taxes.
An American economist named Nick Tiedemann, who teaches at Virginia Polytechnic Institute, he's argued that if local communities collected enough of the economic rent of the land of those communities, there could be a reverse revenue sharing from municipalities up to the state or province level and then to the federal government. So instead of the federal government imposing an individual income tax on all citizens, the rent could possibly pay for those upper level governments and help to eliminate the kind of broad-based taxes that are now imposed.
Great. Someone else asked for some book recommendations to learn a little bit more. So are there any particular books that you would recommend on the subject?
The first one that we always recommend is called Progress and Poverty, written by Henry George, who's sort of the founder of the modern land value tax movement. And so that one would be a good start. Also, Who Owns the Sky by Peter Barnes is a good one. The title alone is fascinating, and the point is that nobody owns the sky. So why, with a carbon tax, for instance, why do you have the right to pollute the air when you don't own the air? And if you do pollute the air, it's a privilege, not a right, and you should compensate the rest of the community. That's another excellent way of understanding what economic rent is.
On our Commonwealth website, we have a Learn tab where we have a bunch of videos from leading experts who all have books as well. Yeah, this website, gameofrents.com, has a very good summary of progress and poverty in a modern vernacular, where he also goes into showing with modern stats how big a deal the land issue is.
Well, I mean, our British colleague Fred Harrison has written about a dozen books on the subject in one way or another. His first book in the early 1980s was titled The Power in the Land, and he has built on that ever since with a number of fairly short documentary films that are available on YouTube. But Fred's work is pretty substantive, and I would recommend any of his books. If you want entertainment, one of the things I was asked to do about 2 years ago was create a music video to a song that was written by a British pop band. They titled the song "Share the Rents." So it's on my YouTube channel. If there are about 7, I've done about 7 music videos so far, all related to social themes. My favorite, I don't know if some of you are young. You may remember the group World Party. If that name rings familiar, but World Party did a song called "Is It Like Today?" And another artist, Eliza Gilkison, did a cover of that, and I've produced a music video to that particular song, and I think it's a really great message piece of music if that turns you on.
Yeah. Would taxing inheritances make it harder for families to provide for family members? Canada is the only country in the world that does not have an inheritance tax. Most countries have it applying to very high levels of wealth. I mean, certainly in the age of billionaires, we might consider that a lot of that wealth has been created due to community co-created sources, and is not all earned. And many countries, including the US, have already decided to not let dynasties pass on between generations. So it really depends on where you stand on that specific idea. I don't think anyone suggests inheritance taxes for the middle class.
Well, the notion there, Floyd, is we should be taxing wealth, not work. Jurisdictions should tax the component of production and least supply. It used to be that people were in low supply. There was always full employment for throughout the Industrial Revolution and beyond, and nature was everywhere. So it would be stupid to tax nature. No one would bother paying. But we put all our money, all our taxes onto people, on sales tax and business taxes and income taxes. But now it's the opposite. People are very plentiful. We're underemployed. We have all kinds of people who are available for work but don't even want it. But nature is now in short supply, so therefore we should switch the taxes off of people and onto nature.
Great.
And that is a view of many techno-futurists like Sam Altman from the OpenAI community, is that money will be made in assets when robots are doing most of the work. So why not tax the robots and the land that they use? How much would people pay in land taxes to get the dividend? Well, there's no set amount. So what I like about this idea is that most people who already pay rent would still pay the same amount, or probably lower when the market adjusts itself. But that is how you'd contribute to government. So tenants wouldn't pay any more, but yet they get reduced income taxes and a dividend. So there's no amount. There's no threshold amount. And I think it's really fair because everyone contributes just by existing, because everyone has to rent or buy a house. You have to live somewhere. It's very consistent. Why would anyone choose to be a landlord? I love this question because I'm also a landlord, and I would distinguish between landlording and being a property manager. Being a property manager is a very noble work. I mean, you know, people have handyman skills. The property management industry is very mature. Companies can manage properties for a 1 or 2% margin, just like grocery stores operate on a 1 or 2% margin. So what we're seeing is that I think that you would shift the composition of who is involved in providing rental property. It wouldn't be people trying to make an extra buck by buying second or third properties and waiting for the market to go up. It'd be people who are more industrious, more resourceful, who like to maintain and repair. It would be professional companies that build high-rise rental buildings, because there is already a very mature property management industry. So that's who should be providing property, not lords of the land, which is an old concept that needs to go. In fact, when I bought my investment property, I was so paranoid. I'm like, I don't care if the market goes up and down. I'm just doing this so I can, because I see it as a business income from providing the building itself. And I consider the land value to be unearned, you know, which is partially why I'm funding this work. Make the unearned income go in and help supports changing the system so that we all benefit. So yeah. How high does LVT rate need to be for land value to drop to 0? Can I buy unimproved land for 0? I'll defer this question to the experts.
The expectation, it will be different in every market, but about 50%. If you're collecting 50% of the potential annual rental value of locations, that's probably enough to begin to change the market dynamics, that the supply of land coming onto the market for sale or development would increase enough to start bringing down the price. And, you know, and economists who have embraced this idea generally favor leaving some percentage of the rent in the hands of the landowner as a sort of management fee, maybe 5% or 10% at the most. But 50%, if you're collecting 50% of that potential annual rental value, land prices will start to come down and may start to come down dramatically. Although they may never come down to 0. You know, you have in the United States, I don't know what the situation is in Canada, but we have about 50 people who own enough land that's the size of 15 or 20 states, and they have such deep pockets that no matter how much an annual tax they would have to pay on the land, they'd be unlikely to be moved to do anything with it other than what they want to do with it now. But for everyone else, the market would start to really have an effect on their decision whether to hold land or to sell it to someone who would develop it.
A way, sort of, Floyd, of understanding how land value tax would affect the cost of land is to compare it with leasing a vehicle. When you lease a vehicle, you don't pay much of an upfront cost. You pay a high monthly cost for the lease. And so that's the same thing. And the higher the monthly lease, the monthly payment is, the lower the upfront cost. So the same thing would happen with land. With land value taxation, you would pay a higher monthly cost for monthly tax. So that would bring down the upfront cost because they're directly balanced one with the other.
For certain, it would at least eliminate to 0 the component of price that is coming due to speculative incentive. And that's the part that I like to hone in on a lot. Because why would anyone bid up the price of land if it's going to cost them?
Say again.
So next question is, how would indigenous lands fit into the system? Again, we're not proposing a specific policy right now. We're promoting the general idea. But if I were to come up with something, I think non-privately owned land would be excluded, but privately owned land would pay the tax. And that could be seen as a form of a reparation as well, if indigenous people are also gaining in the dividends so that is an area that we're consulting in right now. We're looking for people from the indigenous community to work with to create a Indigenous perspective on these concepts. If anyone has connections in Canada as well, please let us know. We're actively working on this right now. So we're kind of at the hour. Maybe before we move on to more LVT talk, it'd be nice to hear from some people in the room that are new. So how does it sound to you? I see Eleanor, Lorna, Carol, Abhijit. Yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective, or you can just enter it in the survey if you prefer. Sarah, Tony Picard, found Scott, yeah. Or yeah,
You may
or
have
not.
to unmute in order to speak out too.
It's also pretty scary for people to speak out when they're in a brand new forum.
Yeah.
So please, people, don't be scared. We're not going to be judging anything you say. It's a learning process.
And Tony Picard has been a pillar of the basic income movement for many years. And
I have unmuted myself. It is the first time for me. It's a lot to take in. And so I don't have really anything substantive to say. And my questions, some of them have been responded to. And I need to do some other exploration before I have anything worthwhile to contribute. But thanks a lot for the session. It's a very intriguing idea.
thank
And
you.
it's Lorna here. I'm delighted that I tuned into this. I'm not unfamiliar with the concepts, but I really didn't know too much about it. So I think it's a fabulous idea. I'd want to learn quite a bit more about it before I could talk to anybody else about it, though. But thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, we can make this the official end. Anyone who wants to stick around and just ask more questions while we have the generosity of some of our domain experts here, or any thoughts about the movement, how to move ahead. This is very early stage. I'd love to get your ideas. So yeah, so I guess another question here was, does LVT move up and down as to density in land use? So rural land has less value than city land.
What we would hope is that land that is currently rural would remain rural for much longer time as sprawling development is discouraged. The infrastructure that exists in cities that's now wasted because of mal-designed development would start to change. This doesn't eliminate land use planning. I mean, we want our cities to all have parks and opportunities for recreation. Would like our cities, I think, to be, at least the center part of the cities, to be places where you can walk from place to place easily, and as much as possible get rid of the automobile. So those are some of the long run virtues of implementing this move to a land only property tax base. The closer you get to eliminating the tax on property improvements and reliance on the economic rent of land, as Frank uses that term, the better will be the ability to plan development for livable cities and for people's ability to live, work, and play in the same place.
Mr. Dodson,
Yes.
does green space, parks, anything that's environmentally positive become land that has zero value and can never be developed? Or is it the opposite end of that spectrum? It's so expensive it can never be developed. How does that work? Because, well, in my country just recently, a mayor went and shot down something called a green belt around the city of Toronto to allow development. And this was all farmland that's now going to be used to turn what should be producing food into housing, after previous governments said, no, we need a green belt to stop the stupid overproduction of housing in a way that's not economically what I would call intelligent. In other words, low density housing of big homes on large lots.
The best example from of how a green belt or a restricted development of area around a city affects land values within the city is Portland, Oregon. Portland has had a long history with this kind of a green belt, and it has not had a 2-rate property tax. So in Portland, property prices, land prices within the developable area have always been high and going up. So the cost of a residential property or property for commercial development in downtown Portland is significantly higher because there's no opportunity to develop outside of the city easily. But a lot of what you're talking about, I think, depends on whether or not the green belt is permanently put into a land trust, or if it's simply subjected to not available for sale because of a piece of legislation that can be overturned. So, I mean, this is what a lot of towns, a lot of communities do that still have some agricultural land. They buy up the development rights, or they put the land into a permanent trust so that its existing use is its permanent use. But of course, what that does generally, it has a two-prong effect. Frank, I hope will back me up on this, that on the one hand, reducing the supply of land available for development will increase the value of the surrounding land. On the other hand, it could make the surrounding property much more attractive because you want to live next to open space. When you walk out your back door, it's great if you can see, a farm, although a lot of people don't want to smell the farm, they just want to see it. These are complicated issues that require a lot of thought in terms of community planning, in my view.
So this fits in with strong towns, doesn't it? Can you hear me? Where because suburbs are being subsidized by central neighborhoods, and so they're moving away from suburban sprawl as well in the strong towns movement. But I think that would mean the suburbs would be moving more towards acreages with wells and septic tanks or whatever, and those could be used to produce food. So I think, like, do any of you here know what I'm talking about with strong towns?
Yeah,
And
I'm familiar with the whole movement, and I've read the book. Who's the author? I'm trying to remember now.
Chuck Marone.
Yeah. Here again, I mean, planning is some people don't believe in planning. They believe in letting the market operate without any planning. That I don't believe in that. But planning process has to take into consideration the interests of all stakeholders and try to find consensus over how the planning decisions are made, and it shouldn't be top down. You have to bring in all the people that are going to be affected by these decisions, and the density, setback requirements, off-street parking, how much parkland is going to be available? Are you going to make the rooftops of buildings available for urban agriculture? I mean, we're facing a lot of remarkable technological innovations that could have an effect on how our cities look and feel and how we live in them.
One idea that the idea of land value taxation, it will make politicians' jobs a lot easier, because once you have LVT, the tax is based on the best and highest use of the land. And that's what we want throughout our whole society. So right now, a lot of the zoning systems and political decisions have to be made what happens where. And this often flies in the face of logic, economic logic and market logic. So if we started out with market logic, then most development applications would be rubber stamped and it wouldn't be so nearly so controversial. And see, what we need to do is make our economic system, i.e. the tax structure, work in concert with the regulations instead of at odds with them.
Is there any economic value to requiring all developers, short of houses, perhaps, just perhaps, being obliged to turn their rooftops into either solar systems or inner city gardens or anything like that? Or does this take away the incentive to do so, or does this add to the incentive to do so by way of a taxation break or something to that effect? That question was so confusing, it pisses me off too, but I apologize. But you know what I'm trying to get to, I think.
I do anyway, Robert. Thank you. It's often to put a $20,000 solar system on a $700,000 house is like beer money. It boggles my mind that it's not. That depends on my beer you drink, of course. It boggles my mind that there should be one line in the building code that all new construction requires a PV solar system to make that building electricity neutral.
The trend in construction for residential, at least, is factory construction. It's more and more housing units are now being constructed in a factory and brought to site, delivered, on a flatbed trailer and assembled in a couple days. And so you can put an amazing amount of technology into the house when you're not, and a whole lot of less waste in the construction if you build houses and factories and deliver them to site. And so they could all be, be basically carbon neutral. If market demand, more and more people want that kind of demand, it'll happen.
Now, Floyd, you talk about technological advances getting rid of jobs. 3D printing of houses is now being done.
Yeah.
And that's amazing technology that's just beginning to what Jeremy Rifkin calls marginal cost of manufacturing. Just now, now we have marginal cost of music or books because they're basically everywhere available for almost free. Then with 3D printing, the cost of stuff will become marginal, almost an irrelevant cost to almost everything we need, which will completely change the whole notion of local supplying of goods. So I wish I could come back in 100 years and see how this all pans out.
Maybe a lot more centralization.
You might be interested in, since you mentioned 3D printing, there's a community going up in Texas right now that is being built exclusively using concrete and 3D printing.
Yeah.
And I saw it and I just could not believe how efficient it was.
Yeah.
No
I saw the
wastage,
same
no
documentary.
walls, no 2x4s.
Yeah.
And the worst part was, to be honest with you, gentlemen, no damn employees. And that sort of is not what I call positive. I mean, they had to go in and finish the house, but to watch it being poured, they just were going 4 inches at a time in a huge circle. By the time they got to the end of the circle, they could do the next one. It was just plain ass scary, and it was going up really fast, a house a day.
Well, your point is well taken by me, Robert. Like now when you go to many stores, they have self-checkout. And some of the union people were decrying this, saying, oh, it should be made illegal because we're putting all these cashiers out of work. Well, being a cashier is a pretty low-level job, mind-numbing job. And I don't know why, I don't think it's anyone's first choice of a job. But in order to deal with this, we need a serious universal basic income to make sure that people don't have to do stupid jobs for no reason. In England, they used to have always a person taking the tickets at the back of the bus and the driver at the front of the bus. And so like you have two people that one can do if you have the technology we have today. So it throws a huge number of people out of work. And myself, I would like to have way more spare time. We should have 3-day work weeks long ago. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, this is something that's also really motivated me is that you know, when John Maynard Keynes predicted that by 2030 we'd have 20-hour work weeks, and I studied his essay, and his essay has a number of clues because he was very careful to not have himself pitched as left or right. And the clues literally mention income not tied to any duty or responsibility. And then he also hints that the first people who got there are the wealthy because they have assets.
Yeah.
And like you put two and two together, well, that should mean asset income for everybody. And in that way, we're not we're disallowing the incentives that are driving up the cost of these assets for everybody. And that's really, it's that simple. I think that's how we get to the 20-hour work week, is that we share in the value of the underlying resources that we all depend on. And we keep more of what we make from our own incomes. And that's how we can get there. And why shouldn't we get there?
When Frank recommended that you read Progress and Poverty by Henry George, one of the things that he might have added, that I will add, is that George was not advocating tax reform. He was doing an analysis of what causes business cycles or economic cycles. And his conclusion was that if we change the way public revenue is raised, we can achieve the nirvana of economics, which is full employment without inflation. And what he meant by that, there would be always more work looking for people than people looking for work. And when that happens in any segment of an economy, as you know, wages and benefits go up. And so that's the beauty of this as systemic reform. It's not just tax reform. It is getting to a society in which every person can reach his or her potential, whatever that potential is, and live a decent human existence.
I always want to point out that land value tax is not a tax at all. It's actually a fee for the privilege of monopolizing land or resources. So even the whole idea of a land value tax is a bad word because it's not a tax. A tax is taking some of the money that someone earns with earned income, and land value capture is collecting some of the unearned income that you didn't earn, so therefore it belongs to the community because it's common wealth. It's all semantics. It's all memes.
I recorded a lot of videos talking about using the words paying rent for land, and then I stopped because I kept getting accused of being a Klaus Schwab supporter or Davos minion.
I don't use the term LVT anymore. I say land value capture. LVC is much more accurate, and it avoids this whole thing about taxing as punitive.
There's also something else that I've tried to get as many of people who write on this subject or speak on this subject to accept, and that is, do not talk about housing prices. Change the language. Talk about residential property, because residential property includes both the value of the building and the land underneath it. And so we get into this, this rut of talking about the housing market. And so land gets disappeared out of that. But by changing the phrase and just writing and talking about residential property markets or residential property values, it gives one the opportunity to really highlight that there are two components to that market: the land component and the housing or building component. So that's one recommendation for those of you who might want to write on this subject. That's a basic thing you can do, I think, to help for clarification when you're writing.
You posted in the chat about not having any self-checkout. How does that work?
Hello. Yeah, there's a few videos I've seen online about Amazon Go and Amazon Go is like a little corner store. Amazon Fresh is it's almost a grocery store, and basically there's no employees other than maybe people who stock. Who knows? Maybe they'll figure that one out. But basically, there's like cameras. Like you use your phone, you swipe to enter the building, and so the cameras in the ceiling are just watching, and they're like, "Oh, you pick this up, pick that up," and then as you walk out, your Amazon account just dings you. It's just and it literally have on the wall, just walk out. So
And then it gets delivered by drone, right?
yeah, but that's what's so amazing to me. It's like every part of the process, from like manufacturing, we've automated that, shipping. Like I was writing about this. It was there was one test that was done with shipping where they had a ship, I guess, go through like the port of Tokyo or something, and they only had to take over like 5% of the time. So they have that. They already have ports that are automated, self-driving trucks, the loading into the store. So it's just about getting all those last little bits, and then you have the full process from manufacturer to get the customer. Yeah, get customer getting it with the drone. So
Yeah, I went into a Go store a couple of years ago, the first one in San Francisco, just to check it out. I was in the area. It was very eerie. There was no one there. But I heard conversation from the back, but it sounded like recorded conversation. It didn't sound like actual live people. So I was like, I wonder if they're just running that to not be creepy.
I feel like that's creepier.
Yeah,
I posted a video in the chat of an Amazon Go store, and also a cool video about drones, because that was brought up, delivery drones. So
yeah, it's you can see there's this, like, I want to talk about technology as the driver, but these discussions always end up being pure land value tax discussions, and I want to really make land relevant in the technology and automation discussion, and it's not easy. It's still a little indirect, too indirect in my mind.
yeah, there was one idea I just had. Like I have a background in filmmaking, and of course, filmmakers are always like looking to get their stuff out there, and we're looking to explain it better. So I'm almost wondering if there's like a thing that can happen there between like some like finding like almost like that one that I posted, creating a really like super good almost animated explainer of what a land value tax is. And then so they can present something, and then we kind of go check this out. I don't know.
There's some of that already available on YouTube. You'd have to just check them out. Just go to YouTube and put in the search line land value taxation. I'm trying to remember who produced it, but there's one very good one that's animated. And Frank DeYoung has produced a couple really good films on introducing land value taxation. There are many. It's what is actually the internet has made it possible for those of us who are proponents to reach people all over the world. My wish is I wish there was more in languages other than English.
Well, all right,
I
guys.
wish there was a way to get this onto Facebook.
I think we're at the 90-minute mark.
Yeah. Floyd, thank you for the invitation. I think I will leave you all, and I'll be glad to join you again if you think I can be any use.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe we'll do this call again in a month or two, maybe 2 months from now.
Okay.
And yeah, thank you.
Right. Thanks all of you. Enjoyed it.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.